Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The global number of deaths from COVID-19 has exceeded 450,000, while the cases crossed 8.4 million. Brazil has reported 1,238 fatalities in the past 24 hours. In the US, 704 people lost their lives overnight, raising the tally to over 118,000. More in this report.
Latin America remains the hardest hit region from the coronavirus pandemic as thousands lose their lives every day. While Brazil's death toll increased to nearly 48,000, Mexico's tally rose by 677 to 19,747. Over in the US, California state has ordered residents to wear face masks in most settings outside the home. New York City will begin phase 2 of opening from Monday after continued improvements in COVID-19 data. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says he is considering a quarantine for travelers from Florida due to virus fears.
The federal government's attitude is an undeniable mistake when it has come to dealing with COVID. Their guidance, their doctrine is an undeniable mistake.
Thailand says it will allow inbound international travel to resume next month for business purposes. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says the country will ease entry restrictions for people coming from Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, and Vietnam. The Chinese capital, Beijing, has been put under partial lockdown after a surge in new cases. Tighter travel restrictions to and from Beijing are in place to contain the recent flare-up of COVID-19 related to a wholesale market.
Individuals who fall into the following three categories are not allowed to leave Beijing. They are those confirmed suspected of coronavirus infection, close contacts, asymptomatic patients, and those with fever. People who have been to the Shenfai Farm Produce Market or have had close contact with those people since May 30th, and those from the medium and high-risk areas.
Meanwhile, Kuwait has decided to ease curfew hours to start from 7 p.m. until 5 a.m., effective from June 21st. The cabinet has also decided to extend the first phase of a 5-phase plan to return to normal life for 1 more week. Over in Sweden, the health agency says about 6% of people in the country have developed COVID-19 antibodies.
In Pakistan, 136 people have died due to COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, raising the toll to over 3,200. The Health Ministry says Pakistan saw a consecutive 5th-day decline in the ratio of new cases as 4,944 infections were registered overnight. The ministry said the tally of patients has surpassed 165,000 with more than 100,000 active cases. It said over 61,000 patients have recovered so far. The ministry said it has now tested over 1 million people for the virus. It said the province of Sindh leads in the number of cases with more than 62,000 infections. Officials said 103 ventilators have been added in the national health sector, increasing the total to over 1,500. Indian troops have martyred 6 more civilians in occupied Kashmir. This takes the death toll to 36 this month so far. The civilians were killed during a cordon and search operation in Pulwama and Shopian districts. 4 youths were martyred at Banpawa, Chittargram area of Shopian, while 2 others were martyred inside a mosque in Pampore area of Pulwama. Indian troops also used brute force and fired tear gas shells at demonstrators in Pampore. The occupied valley has been under a crushing curfew and communication blackout for the past 319 days. An Islamabad court has ruled that self-exiled Pakistani politician Altaf Hussain ordered the killing of his party's leader, Dr. Imran Farooq. Farooq was stabbed to death outside his home in London in September 2010. The court handed life imprisonment to 3 suspects for their involvement in the murder of the party leader. It ruled 2 senior party leaders based in London conveyed Hussein's orders to the relevant people in Pakistan. The prosecutor said besides the sentence, the convicts were fined over $6,000 each. The Metropolitan Police in the UK said the conviction came after they shared evidence with Pakistani authorities. Hussain is the founder of a political party, Muttahida Qawmi Movement. The US says it has reduced its troop presence in Afghanistan to 8,600, the level agreed to as part of the Doha deal with the Taliban. Speaking at a webinar, CENTCOM Commander General Kenneth McKenzie said a full withdrawal depends on the Taliban fulfilling their commitments. McKenzie said the peace deal requires the US to fully withdraw its forces by next May. He said the Taliban are already at odds with ISIS, but the US needs to see what the group does against the militants. He said Washington wants to be satisfied that attacks against the US are not going to be generated from Afghanistan. As part of the deal, the Taliban agreed not to allow any violent group to use Afghan territory to plan or carry out attacks on the US. The US has once again renewed its threat to cut ties with China. In a tweet, President Donald Trump said Washington has a policy option to disassociate with Beijing. Trump's statement comes a day after Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer said decoupling the US and Chinese economies was not a viable option. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington and the G7 nations are gravely concerned over Beijing's new security law on Hong Kong. Beijing rejected G7's comments, saying it remains determined to introduce the law in the semi-autonomous territory. The former Atlanta police officer charged in the murder of unarmed black man Rayshard Brooks has turned himself in to authorities. Jail records show Garrett Rolfe, who is charged with felony murder and 10 other counts, was being held at the Fulton County Jail. Fulton County African-American District Attorney Paul Howard said he had recommended to no bond for Rolfe. Howard said he himself had received a series of racist threats, including one from an individual who threatened to burn down his home. Meanwhile, the second officer, Devin Brosnan, who faces lesser charges, was released on bond. Brosnan's lawyer rejected claims his client had agreed to become the state's witness, saying he had only promised to cooperate with the investigation. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has branded former National Security Advisor John Bolton as a traitor over his explosive new memoir. In a tweet, Pompeo accused Bolton of violating his sacred trust with the American people by spreading lies and half-truths. According to some of the excerpts, Bolton claims Trump pleaded for help from China to win re-election in 2020. Bolton alleged that Pompeo dismissed Trump's North Korea diplomacy, saying it had zero probability of success after the 2018 Singapore summit. Meanwhile, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Trump is ethically unfit and intellectually unprepared to be the president. Pelosi said she was consulting with her fellow Democrats on whether to subpoena Bolton about the allegations in the book. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled against President Donald Trump's bid to end a major program that protects young immigrants from deportation. The justices upheld lower court rulings that found Trump's move unlawful. The program protects about 650,000 young people who entered the U.S. without documents as children. Trump raged against the ruling, implying that the Supreme Court doesn't like him. The Trump administration has sought to end the Obama-era policy since 2017. Meanwhile, former President Barack Obama praised the ruling and urged voters to elect a Democratic president and Congress in November. Turkey says Ankara is ready to cooperate with the U.S. in Libya in the near future. At a webinar, Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said the Foreign and Defense Ministries will soon work with the U.S. counterparts on Libya. Çavuşoğlu said President Tayyip Erdogan and U.S. President Donald Trump have similar perspectives on the war-torn country. He said the development will be important for regional stability and Libya's future. The foreign minister said Ankara would like to further expand the areas of cooperation with the U.S. His statement follows the Turkish delegation's visit to Libyan capital Tripoli, where it held a series of meetings with the government. France marks the 80th anniversary of General de Gaulle's call for wartime resistance. The general and former president appealed to the French population to resist the German occupation of France during World War II.
Accompanied by Prime Minister Eduardo Philippe, President Emmanuel Macron led troops in the city of Suresnes. President Macron also visited London and along with Prime Minister Boris Johnson marked the appeal of June 18th. The BBC broadcasted General Charles de Gaulle's speech on 18th June 1940. De Gaulle had fled from France for Britain the previous day after the French government agreed to seek an armistice from the Nazis. De Gaulle was ultimately recognized by Churchill as the leader of Free French forces. After the war, he became the first president of France's Fifth Republic from 1959 to 1969.
Germany has accused Russia of murdering a Chechen asylum seeker in Berlin, exacerbating already strained relations between the two countries. In a statement, the prosecutor's office said the suspect under arrest had received orders from Moscow to murder Zalim Khan Khagon Goshvili last summer. The prosecutors formally charged the 49-year-old Russian national with a murder and violation of Germany's weapons law. On Thursday, the foreign ministry summoned the Russian envoy to convey Berlin's stance regarding the murder case. Reacting, Ambassador Sergei Neshenev said these accusations are groundless and not backed by the evidence. Kenya has been elected to the UN Security Council, defeating Djibouti in a second round of voting by the 193-member General Assembly. Nairobi joins Mexico, India, Ireland and Norway, who were elected on Wednesday. Mexico and India were elected unopposed, while Ireland and Norway beat Canada. The countries will take up their two-year terms on a 15-member council on 1st of January 2021. The Security Council is the only UN body that can make legally binding decisions like imposing sanctions and authorizing the use of force. In Ivory Coast, 13 people have died in a landslide near Abidjan city after a drainage channel burst due to torrential rains. Abidjan's prefect, Vincent Toby, said several others are missing. The prefect said 20 houses were also swept away by the floods in the area. The mayor of Eniyama, Amidou Silla, said the death toll is expected to rise as the search for survivors was still going on. Abidjan is home to some 5 million people, many of whom live in precarious shanty towns in flood-prone or dangerous zones. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. NATO says it will investigate French accusations that Turkey's Navy failed to respond to an allied call for inspection this month in the Mediterranean. France's Armed Forces Minister Florence Parly brought up the incident during a meeting of NATO defense chiefs. She said Turkish warships flashed their radar lights 3 times at the French warship in the eastern Mediterranean. She said the French warship was on a NATO mission to check whether the Turkish vessel was smuggling arms to Libya. Ankara rejected the French accusations as baseless. Turkey's military officials said the French ship was making fast and dangerous maneuvers that breached NATO principles and Navy security rules. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić says he will reject the EU membership if Belgrade does not receive concessions in return for recognizing Kosovo. After meeting Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Vučić said no resolution of Serbia's future ties with Kosovo will be possible without Moscow's consent. Serbia, which is in talks to join the EU, has set a number of preconditions for normalizing ties with Kosovo. It also wants to regulate outstanding problems, including issues related to energy and finances. Kosovo, where Albanians account for 90% of the population, declared independence from Serbia in 2008. The Bank of England has announced plans to inject an extra £100 billion into the economy to help fight COVID-19 induced downturn. The bank's Monetary Policy Committee increased the size of a bond buying program while retaining the interest rate at 0.1%. The bank said recent indicators suggest the economy is starting to bounce back as it is contracting less severely after the ease in lockdown. Bank's Deputy Governor, Ben Broadbent, said Britain's economy is heading for a roughly 20% contraction over the first and second quarters of 2020. In its May outlook, the central bank predicted the economy will shrink by 27%. Earlier, the UK's economy contracted by a record 20.4% in April. The UK says post-Brexit a trade deal with the EU cannot be extended into autumn. The statement issued by Prime Minister's office follows talks between Prime Minister Boris Johnson and French President Emmanuel Macron at 10 Downing Street. The statement said Prime Minister has welcomed the agreement to intensify talks, but it said the UK does not believe it makes sense to prolong negotiations. Meanwhile, the Home Office announced more than 3.3 million EU citizens have been granted the right to remain in the UK permanently after Brexit. In its latest update on the EU scheme, it said 57% of those had been granted settled status. Asian stock markets are trading mixed as investors monitor a recent uptick in COVID-19 cases in some countries. Most of the stocks are posting muted gains as fears of virus resurgence dent hopes of a revival of economic activity. Shanghai Composite has gained nearly 1%. Nikkei 225 is trading over 0.5% higher. Seoul's Kospi is trading marginally lower. Hong Kong's Hang Seng is trading flat. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained nearly 1%. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.